Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We've got our review here today for episode 13 of The Bad Batch Season 3. We're almost to the end, only two more episodes next week and the week after. So hopefully, you guys are excited to talk about this episode. We're going to get into everything about this week's episode, full spoilers. So, again, if you haven't watched the episode, you know the drill probably by now, but if you haven't watched the episode, make sure you watch the episode, come back, and then watch this stream. You probably have enough time to go watch the episode right now, and then come back and join the stream by the time it's over, because we'll be going for about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the flow of the conversation. Usually it goes about an hour and a half. So send in those questions, because after we do our little reaction and review right now, we're going to get to your guys' questions and take your comments, your thoughts, your theories, your predictions for next week, what you thought about this week's episode, and some of the talking points we have when we bring up our reviews. So make sure you send all that stuff into the chat. We will get to it all as soon as we can. It is first come, first serve. But if you'd like to make sure you get your chat or your comment sent to the top, you're welcome to send in a super chat. Greatly helps the channel out. That's completely up to you, but we always appreciate the support. All right, so let's get into the Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 13, Into the Breach. Into the Breach was a pretty straightforward episode, not too much going on. A lot of more predictable plot lines, but I think still an effective episode in that we are inching closer and closer to finally having our finale of this show. This episode got us into the place we needed to. We're on the way to Tantiss. Tantiss, here we come. We're on our way to Mount Tantiss with the rest of the Bad Batch and Admiral Rampart. Echo rejoins the crew, and Omega is hatching an escape plan, her second escape plan from Mount Tantiss in this episode with all the Force-sensitive children. So those are all the updates we had for this episode. But Sanak, what were your thoughts on the episode as a whole?
I thought this is the type of episode that I end up appreciating almost immediately after it finishes, because not only does it progress our plot to where it needs to be, but it definitely showcases and highlights the growth of our characters, the weight of everything that they've done since that season 7 arc of the Clone Wars, when they were first introduced up till the most recent episodes. And it's really nice to see that our friend Omega, that after 3 seasons she has matured greatly. She has proven herself to be being her own individual, and she's doing what she can to help the kids around her, right? Even though she's been put into the situation, it wasn't even a doubt in her mind what she's going to do next. She's like, yeah, I'm going to take you guys with me. Like, this is cruel, this is unfair. The only thing I can do is understand why you're here and immediately start working around the clock to make sure that we can get out of here. And yeah, she's still making little mistakes here and there, like how she let the tiles kind of clatter all over the floor. But as we saw, she was very quick and very able to handle her business. So it's really cool to see, faster than I would say Ahsoka for sure. Maybe at the same pace as where we were with obviously Ezra in Rebel season 3, but it's still nice to see the younger point of view characters really come into their own here, and she feels the most grounded too, especially in this episode. She's just got this level of maturity that I think a lot of her experiences and her strengths that really came out of season 2 are really on full display here, and they have been throughout season 3. But for a long time, my Clone Wars fan, I thought this episode was amazing because we got to see Echo finally, like, really showcase who he is. Like, this is a guy who, yeah, like, we know that he went through a lot of trauma. He's presumed dead. He's turned into a cyborg, used by, the Trade Federation and everything. But at the end of the day, he does join the Bad Batch, and he becomes an equal member of that group, even if he knows that he's not different from birth. He still identifies with them, and he's shown to be a great player, right? The only thing is we haven't really seen that with the fact that the Clone Wars was canceled, and we didn't really get to see some of the Kashyyyk episodes and how he would have fully acclimated with the team. Really, it was just his peak synergy is his initial moments in that season 7 arc of the Bad Batch. Sorry, the Clone Wars, right? In the Bad Batch, it's like immediately they have some cool moments at the start, but almost like within third or fourth episode of season 1, you already feel he's like kind of being pushed to the background. He's got, you know, the fact that he's just not the focus of the show, even though he arguably has the richest story to delve into, it becomes noticeable. And in season 2, obviously he left to go with Rex, so he's only been popping in and out. But the best part about season 3 has been that every time that he's shown up, he has been impactful. In this episode, he fully displayed all his skills. He reminds you that he was an ARC trooper, and not without any reason, right? The combination of those skills, the reality of his life and his body, and how he's a determined soldier above else and not necessarily a bad batch at all times, and how he can use that to his advantage here, obviously with installation 3 and making sure that they can get all the codes and understanding of how to get to Tantiss. Yeah, that definitely elevated the episode for me, just seeing how capable he was. Hunter too, right? Hunter, for a long time, I felt like his personality has been stagnant. He feels like, especially in season 2, looking back at it, like he's lost. He knows how to be a great leader. He knows what to do when it's a fight or fight situation. But when it's like mission of the week, when it's like taking care of a kid, after a while, it's like the monotony seems to have gone to him. And I can blame that more on writing, but I'm glad that at least now in season 3, he's come alive once more, not just because he has to save Omega, but because his reconnection to Crosshair, because, you know, he realizes that this is what we have now. I'm trying to hold on to everything. I lost tech. All these things are there. And I like this moment with Rampart. It's not something that will necessarily translate into like, oh, he's going to be a good guy and do everything right here. But in a moment of need, maybe Rampart can be like, you know what? I want to be a good person. I know what's happening on Tantiss is atrocious. I will help you out because this is probably for the best that this doesn't continue, right? And having that leadership quality come back, I really like that. I missed it. We forgot how easily he was like the boss of this crew, right? Just like how Boss was with Delta Squad. It was limitless trust, is effortless leadership and flow, and we've been missing a lot of that through these 3 seasons. And this was an episode to showcase that he still got it. So, you know, I really liked the whole episode. I like that we get to see a little bit more of the Imperial aesthetic really come into play here, especially since we're near Coruscant. And that last like couple of scenes, right? It almost felt Andor-esque to me, where it's like the music was swelling and the belief of the characters, what they're fighting for, their mission. It reminded me of that, and I think that's what's gonna carry us into that next episode, the last second to last episode before our finale. And who knows? We still don't know if that finale is going to be super big or long, but I do feel a little bit more confident with just how this episode ended. There's an assurance throughout this episode that I didn't feel in the last one, and I definitely felt in this one.
I agree with a lot of what you said. I feel less strongly about this episode than you do. I liked it. It was fine. I thought it was another good progression episode. Enjoyed the return of Echo, but again, that kind of makes me regret, some of the way the show has treated Echo in its entirety. Having him disappear for a season and a half of a 3-season show has just made him feel like an afterthought of a character, unfortunately. And I was really hoping to get more of him. Yeah, he's a little more developed than the rest of the Bad Batch were when we started this show. So I understand season 1 not focusing on him, but I felt like season 2 and season 3 should have given him a bit more of an arc. But he's gone with Rex, and hopefully we'll see what that adventure entails in the future. But right now, he just seems like somebody who just pops up whenever he's needed, or it's kind of convenient for him to show up. So I think overall I've been disappointed with the way the Bad Batch has handled Echo, but this was one of his best episodes so far. I love the way he takes charge, and I think in that sense, one thing I'll definitely agree with you on is that this episode really puts the characters into action. They're ready. They're not going to hold back anymore. Omega is their priority. The family unit of the Bad Batch has been the main driving force of this whole show. And as much as we want to get into other related plot lines, like what's happening with the clones or what's going on with the the Vault project or what's going on with the actual experimentation on Tantiss. What does it all mean for the future of the Empire? There's so many intriguing things that the Bad Batch is setting up. But I think that's going to be the more and more the shows goes on, and every season we say this, and I've said it for the last couple weeks. This show is the Bad Batch show. It doesn't have anything else to do with the rest of that. We're going to be disappointed by the lack of interest. We're going to be disappointed by unanswered questions about a lot of different things. But I think what this is doing is setting up a bright future for those explanations to eventually play out in other material. And I wonder often, this is kind of a side note, but I often wonder if that was maybe an Audible pulled because of lack of viewership for the show. Like maybe if the show wasn't as widely watched as something they hope they can put out in the future, maybe they're like, let's pull back some of these answers, maybe these universe defining answers, and not show them in the Bad Batch per se. But those fans who are interested in the Bad Batch, they get an early preview of what these answers might look like in the future. So I often wonder that. But as we get closer and closer to the finale, 2 episodes left after this was the one that we needed to really drive the Bad Batch forward. And so, in that way, I enjoyed all 22 minutes of it. It was fast paced, it was interesting, it was exciting. I can't wait to see how Omega's escape attempt plays out in juxtaposition to the Bad Batch's rescue attempt. What does it exactly look like with Tantiss? And I think now that we're there, now that we're not spending another episode trying to get to Tantiss, I'm more excited now for the last two than I might have been if this episode had just ended with them getting some intel. And now we're like, okay, what else do they have to do to build up to finally getting there? So we're going to see it next episode. We're going to see it start, at least, probably not end too well before we see it start to go a little better in the finale. But excuse me, I'm quite excited for next week. But this was another just good episode. In the vein of season 3 has been a very good season, the entire run. There have been no bad episodes, no episodes that I felt like were a waste of time. Just also not as many like, wow, that's amazing episodes. It's been pretty steady. And I've enjoyed that because the Bad Batch, for so much of its runtime from season 1 and 2, has been, way up here or way down here. I've enjoyed the nice, steady season 3. And I think if it finishes really strong with the finale, especially these last 2 episodes, if they both hit really hard, then this season as a whole goes from really solid to actually quite great. So those were my thoughts. Those were our thoughts. Let us know your thoughts in the chat. We will be taking your chats and discussing the Bad Batch season 3, episode 13 for the rest of the stream. So keep sending in those questions, those comments, your theories for what might happen in episodes 14 and 15. Do you think there'll be more Bad Batch related content or clone related content after the show ends? Let us know what you think of all that in the chat. We will get to it as soon as we can. And it will be first come, first serve unless you send in a super chat. So keep sending in those questions and we will get to them right now. So first up in the comments, we have Nikhil, who says, proud Patreon subscriber. Thank you, Nikhil. We appreciate you subscribing to our Patreon there. And for everybody who is not subscribed, definitely check it out. We have a Patreon and YouTube membership tiers if you're interested. There's a lot of great perks on both of them, as well as, some exclusive live streams for certain tiers, the ability to help choose the content on our channel, as well as a variety of other great perks. So make sure you check those out. If you haven't yet, you can check it out on both YouTube and Patreon. Jake says, what's your predictions on deaths, if any? I hope not, but only 2 more episodes. That is the question of the show, Jake. The deaths, it could be really anybody. We know a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, we had somebody who was quite convinced about Omega dying. I'm really not convinced about Omega dying at all. I think she's the only one that I think is truly safe. I don't see the entire Bad Batch dying, though. I think it will be a select group of characters or just one character. I don't think it's going to be Crosshair, Echo, Wrecker, and Hunter. Like, it's not going to be all 4 of them. They're not all going to go down. I really don't believe that. But I would say bet my money would have been on Crosshair at the beginning of the show. He hasn't been as big of a focus these last few weeks. Maybe with how big of a return Echo made here, there is a possibility that Echo goes. He would be the one, especially with the way the show has kind of distanced itself from Echo, that like they could kill off fans of Clone Wars. We'd all be kind of disappointed and sad, but it wouldn't be the world's biggest loss to where fans are just devastated and upset with the show. I think personally, I think Crosshair would be a great choice because of his arc throughout the season, throughout the entire show. He would be the best choice. Hunter would be next because Hunter dying for Omega is something that I think is completely in the cards. Wrecker, I think, would be a good death, something that would be emotionally impactful because of the role he plays in the show as a comedic relief, as the fun type of character. If he had a tragic or serious moment, I think it would hit because that's not his style. But Wrecker also hasn't been given enough character to where I want more from him in the future. And if they were to kill him off, it would be kind of on that Echo level of like, I'd be sad, but I wouldn't be as devastated as if it were Hunter and Crosshair. But what are your thoughts, Sanak? Who do you think might die if anybody dies?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really don't think we'd get to see Wrecker die because we've already kind of had that sort of similar death with Gregor and Rebels, right? And like everyone was so happy that Gregor was back, but we also didn't really know too much more about Gregor after his arc, right? It was years later, we're like, oh wow, he's here. It's cool and all, but yeah, other than like his initial episodes in season 2 of Rebels, he really didn't do anything, right? And I'm not saying Wrecker is entirely on that same boat because he has been in every episode essentially. He has been, able to have like leading episodes of sorts, some of the more fillerish, and still show off his strength and show off some of the qualities that really make him who he is as a character. But I feel like if you do that, you're not gonna get much impact. If you swapped him in, let's say right at the end of season 1, especially after a little bit after his brain chip activates and removal, right? If he then died, like that would be fresh in our mind. We'd be saying, "Oh man, like he's a happy go lucky guy," and then these things happen, and it's another example of how terrifying he really could be if he wasn't who he was. Right now, it's like, mm, I don't really mind. I don't really care to that same extent. Uh, Hunter and Crosshair has been a pairing that I wanted, like the both of them dying, because they are almost like the yin and yang of this group. But I think you do bring up a good point. In the last few weeks, he's almost settled into just being happy with who he is, composed and just playing it by the book, following along with the leader. But I think it would be interesting for Crosshair to be the sacrificial play because I mean, even in the Bad Batch, like the other characters reference are like it's always Hunter and Crosshair going at each other, right? But that's just their dynamic. That's what's always made them both better. So yeah, it'd be nice to see both of them gone, but I could definitely see one of the two. I could see Hunter, like you say, kind of step out and stay behind. I could see Crosshair, take one for Omega because she's given him life and meaning, right? She has shown him that he can be a different person and he can have redemption. But where does it stand after these last few episodes? I don't know. It is a little difficult to say because maybe their plan is to save him for later and continue his arc because I wouldn't say it's complete. I think the way he was progressing through season 1, 2, and a lot of the earlier parts of 3, I was like, yeah, there's going to be even more happening. But around like the Ventress episode of sorts, he's just been there, right? And I
Yeah.
think if you're gonna make him be a character be killed off, you have to make the finale at least a double length episode where he is almost separated off and he has to show off what he has learned and what he has done during his Imperial service when he was a killer agent himself, right? When he was a lone wolf. And I think it'd be an interesting way to deal with his story where he almost has to approach Tantiss by himself because he gets separated and how he handles that and what he like tells himself or how he reacts to the horrors that will be there. Then maybe you could see like that build up, ramp up, and then play out where he sacrifices himself for Omega. I don't see Echo dying at this point. I really don't. I think he is being saved for a future early Dark Times show. I know the implication of the title, "The Cavalry Arrives," to me suggests that Rex finally comes in with his crew and all that.
Mhm.
And I don't think Echo, like you said, with how disconnected he's been throughout the show, for him to just have this cool episode here and then maybe another cool episode and then to die, I don't think it's a great service. There's always been that complaint from like not just us, but so many fans of like the one time he talked about fives was just like an afterthought with Rex while they were like looking for the machine to remove the brain chip, right? He needs to like reckon with a little bit of his legacy of being the last member of Domino Squad before he's gone for me. If he starts talking about Domino Squad, he's dead, right? That's 100% the case. But he's kind of just so focused on doing what is needed and not really on himself at this point that I'm like, I think we need a little bit more time. And then Jake, I just don't think Omega dies, not simply because she's too important, and there's potential for her in live action, all that. It's a rarity to kill children in Star Wars, like in books, in comics, and all that. It's hard to, right? And I know we meme the whole youngling scene with Anakin, but that is a very dark scene of, for many kids, seeing this hero, like, yeah, you can understand a little bit about like why he killed the Tusken Raiders and all that, even if it was like disturbing. But then to like kill the younglings who are like, "Oh, Master Skywalker, like, are you here to protect us?" and all that. It's like that was. I know we don't see it, but it's a horrifying thing, right? And this is still, at the end of the day, like a kids-friendly franchise. It's not trying to do too much, right? There will be shows like Andor and all that, but their deaths are like people in their 30s and 40s who are like very gray morality and all that. Omega is a pure-hearted person who is very skilled and has a lot of room to grow, but to kill her now would be shocking. Would it be effective? I don't know. I think you're gonna have to like almost dedicate like the entire finale to her to make it effective, and there's not really that much time for that. So no, I really just think it's Crosshair, Hunter, or both. If it's anyone else, it's like the nameless clones. Maybe Rampart, right? Make one sacrificial play, be like, I didn't really want to die, but better this than what I was living as before. I guess you guys gave me a chance to do something right, but I still don't get that feeling from him where it's like, oh no, like the Empire is wrong. He doesn't dislike the Empire. He just dislikes the conditions that resulted in him being stripped as an admiral more than anything.
Yeah.
Still,
Yeah, he even in this episode he's like, I miss being the vice admiral when
yeah,
he's ordering people around. So I still think Rampart's coming in for the his sacrificial play will be to sacrifice the Bad Batch for his own personal
yeah,
gain. Although now that he's on Tantiss, like I don't know what his way out would be. Like he could be like, yeah, they held me hostage, but I think the Empire would still frown on the fact that you helped them get to Tantiss. So I don't know what role he actually will be able to pull out of sacrificing the Bad Batch, but I don't really see him turning good. There's just not enough time in the show. It'll feel like a weak change. Whereas, like I mentioned last week, the very obvious parallel being Callus from Rebels, that was given 2 seasons worth of build up and then a whole season worth of not knowing he's Fulcrum and then finally finding out. So I think Rampart's done. He's going to end up either dying or somehow getting sucked into being part of the crew in a future show or future follow up, but I don't see him actually turning into a full good guy in this season. But yeah, I think to me, Crosshair is the one that like his arc is the one that's built up to this, right? We have the CX clones and CX2, and we've had the comparison between Crosshair and the CX clones. Once we get into Tantiss, I could see a scene where Crosshair's going through the hallways and he finds the CX clones or the early Dark Troopers or whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that they're doing with these clones, and he has to kind of face them directly. I could see that being an arc that fully realized for Crosshair, and I think that would be something that would tie in nicely from his journey over the entirety of the show if he were to make a sacrificial play in order to take down the CX clones or the Dark Troopers. So that would be something I could see for sure for that character. But yeah, Echo, I mean, not Echo, Omega, there's no real satisfying way of killing Omega. Like, I just don't see it anyway. She's just the heart and soul of the show. and she's the heart of soul of the show in a way that doesn't really ever scream, sacrificial angel, like she's not going to, I mean, she would make the decision. I could see her making the decision, but I can't see the show actually taking that leap. It would feel like a really big swing and more, I think you said the right thing, more shocking than actually warranted. But Hunter and Crosshair are the two that seem like they would be very warranted. Like those two, if either one of them die or both of them die, I think it fits in thematically with the show. I'd still be a little disappointed if Hunter went, because I think Hunter has basically been given one type of personality. He's the leader and he's the father. Like they all have, like the rest of the Bad Batch have their kind of brotherly quirks with Omega, but Hunter really is the dad of the group, and that's been his role. And when you don't have Omega in trouble in season 2, he doesn't have much of a role. But then when you have Omega in trouble in season 3 and season 1, he has a bigger role. So that's kind of the only thing that's part of his personality in the show. And I would have liked to see him actually have a bit more, considering how much time we gave to Tech, how much time we gave to Crosshair. I would have liked to see Hunter get that same type of growth, because really he has only grown in season 1. I haven't seen much out of him in the last 2 seasons, and I think to kill him off now would be something that would be ultimately a little disappointing. But I think considering he is one of the main characters of the show, I still think it would work well enough. It would work better than Wrecker dying out of nowhere or Echo dying out of nowhere. And Echo would be so disappointing. I think I still think he's a possibility. I really do, but it would be very disappointing because he's been completely relegated out of the show. And the fact that he was also the least explored of Domino Squad way back in the day. He had very little role, and then he just comes back and then dies again. That would be really, really frustrating. So hopefully they don't do that. Jake says, I think Hunter will survive because he gets out of a lot of things, in my opinion. And then also says, I think Hunter, Echo, and Omega survive. Imagine Hunter and Omega as a father and daughter ending, and both could show up later. And I hope they do. I still am hoping for that live action or even post Return of the Jedi animated Hunter and Omega, especially Omega. I really want to see how she relates to Boba Fett. But yeah, I would love to see them show up in the future. I don't really see either of them. I don't see Omega dying for sure. Hunter, possibility.
Yeah.
Skywalker's Academy says, you've been demoted. He lost his status when he went down, even if it was Palpatine covering his own butt. You're talking about Rampart, right? Yeah, I think Rampart is he's such a social climber, and he plays that political game in the Navy, and he might have never thought it would come back to bite him, but I do see him trying to make some type of play in this show.
Yeah, I mean, I said it last stream. He is like a project manager. He's so good. Like even in this episode, he's like, "Oh, are you telling me what the code is?" And he's like, references code 5 dash section 10. They're like, "All right, like you don't have to tell us twice to go back to like our barracks and just like chill out." Like I'd rather not have to like guard a computer station. And like he knows his stuff. He's not, I don't know. He's like naval in the sense that he's got like the infrastructure behind him. He knows exactly how everything operates, how it's connected, right? So for him to, I don't know, like just covering his own butt, like you're right, but I think in some ways that's intentional. You Palpatine, by the nature of his character, he's gonna kind of be all knowing. He's gonna kind of pull like thousands of strings at a time, and even if he's not necessarily checking on it at all points, he knows that Rampart, especially this early on in the Empire when there aren't like big dedicated players. Tarkin is a player, but he's not the Tarkin that we know by the time of A New Hope and Rogue One. Rampart in this situation has come out through the Bad Batch show as like, this is a guy who's setting up the structure of how my empire is going to function with the code chains, with the removal Camino. He does all the things that Palpatine wants to like hide away and ensure that others comply by and feel like it's just a necessary adjustment, right? He never truly comes off as like horrendously evil. Like he is purely a fascist. He loves order, he loves control, but he isn't someone that you look at and think immediately a villain. You think he's just really good at what he does when you first meet him, and that maybe there is some humanity behind him. But what's great about him, as we saw over that first season, is that no, he enjoys this. He revels in this, right? Like even when he had those moments of power this episode, he was like, "Oh man, like I love that," right? So Palpatine covering his butt, sure, you can say that, but I could also say that he has elevated him necessarily because he wants his empire to function. And then once he started getting out of hand and like a little ambitious and started making a couple mistakes and getting sloppy with his work, he was like, all right, well, get out of here. Now you brought this to my home planet. You brought this to the center of my attention. This is not good, buddy. Like, get out. Like you've gotten initial Senate resistance after presumably a period where everyone was like, yeah, it's fine that Palpatine's not showing up to our sessions anymore. He's a scarred man. He's struggling to survive. And every time he shows up, it's like a moment of like, wow, our emperor is doing so well. He's letting us handle things. But that's not the point, right? So once Senator Tucci and all her storyline comes in, once the clone rights and all that come to the forefront, Palpatine's obviously pissed. He's like, what do you mean? Like you've done everything to as I've asked, but then now you've stopped for remembering that you have to suppress. You've got to keep these troublemakers out of hand here. And now we have to give them rights. We have to give them pensions and all that stuff, protections. Like you've let these people remember a time, like our responsibilities of a different society and uh, governance system that I'm very intentionally trying to get rid of. So in many ways, when I look at him, it's not just Palpatine's covering his butt. It's just that he made use of Rampart. Rampart got a little too much of a big head, and he's like, all right, let's put you down. So does Rampart learn from that? I don't think so. But if there's any place where you can have a character have a very justifiably like General Hux like death, it would be Tantiss. This is not a place that anyone should be escaping from unless they are so valued and so important and control their legacy and power. Rampart at this point is not supposed to even be here.
Yeah, I just don't see anything from Rampart that screams rebellion or any type of loyalty to anything outside of the Empire. I'm not saying he's stern-headed enough to where he won't be like, well, the Empire screwed me, so screw the Empire, I'm going to go on my own. But I don't see him ever joining another cause. Like, I don't feel like he in any of these episodes seems like he has any regrets for anything he did or has any regrets about what happened to him to where he wants revenge. He doesn't seem like somebody who's vengeful. He just wants to be let go. He wants to try to find a new way to run his own new little kingdom. I could see him being a warlord out there somewhere, somebody who maybe disappears and like comes back when the Imperial remnant is around, something like that, where he's just this kind of tattered guy who's still holding on to what he used to be. And I think that's where his arc would be most interesting. Most likely he does die in this last this finale or these last two episodes because it would be weird for him to just all of a sudden join the clones, but if he could somehow affect the bargaining ship of getting some new status, it wouldn't be completely out of bounds. I think it would be a little weird and out of character for the Empire if somehow they just forgave him, but it doesn't mean they can't use him for a little while to get to the Bad Batch, make him think he was getting his status back, and then Hemlock just kills him. I think that could be something that's on the table for sure. David Fieldson sent in a super chat. Thank you so much, as always, David. David says, I'm coming in late. Lots to wrap up in 2 episodes, that's for sure. Love the art, music, and tension of this episode, but no larger themes. I want the Bad Batch series to affect larger canon. Hey, that is the big point of these these last few episodes. Mentioned it last week, mentioned it basically every week since the Wolf episodes ended. I think really I've felt this way since the last double episode that was just good, but nothing incredible. And that's that this show constantly is willing to be to set up things, put things on a tee, but they're not willing to hit the ball, like we're just setting it up for the future. There's so much set up for the future, whether it's Ventress, whether it's Rex and Echo and Hauser having their own show, Cody disappearing. There's so many things in this show that felt like that's interesting. Let's go there. But then ultimately, what is it the show always do? It always goes back to just being a Bad Batch show. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I think some of that weight, some of that expectation, those types of things, some of that is on people like us who talk about it every single week, right? We get our hopes up, we get our expectations up, we start to predict, but it's not 100% on us. It's on a little bit, it's shared blame across showrunners, writers, and us, because we build it up, yes, but they leave the seeds, right? If you don't want people to talk about it in today's world, then don't leave the seeds. Don't set things up for people to be like, this is really exciting. Cody's back. Ventress is back. What does this mean? How does it connect to Dark Disciple? How does it do this and that? And then never talk about it again. So unfortunately, David, for me, based on the last 2 seasons, based on how this show has been basically since the Ventress episode, I think the only thing that we get actually wrapped up in this season is the Bad Batch kind of take down Tantiss and ultimately escape with Omega, maybe lose a couple members. I don't think we wrap up the clone plot point. I don't think we really affect larger canon. I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, since you came on late, I'm really starting to get the sense that this show, maybe because the viewer ratings haven't been as good since season 1 as they had hoped, maybe there were plot points that were set up for season 3 that ultimately they said, well, let's try our hand with the Rex show. Let's try our hand with the clone show. Let's try our hand with something else and really explain that Palpatine Rise of Skywalker connection, Sith Eternal connection, the cloning, all that stuff. Let's really explain that in another show that might be more widely watched, because at this point, the Bad Batch is going to get the viewers it gets, but it's not getting new viewers. And I think I could see that coming from the top, because it has been a really solid show and a really solid arc for the Bad Batch. And I've enjoyed it. And I think if this show ends strongly, it will be amongst the top half of the best Star Wars things out there for sure. It's not going to reach Rebels or Clone Wars, either Clone Wars show levels for me in terms of animation, but I think it is an upper tier Star Wars show. It's right in the middle upper Star Wars shows, but it is something that really has given us a lot of hope, a lot of setup. And I ultimately don't think they're going to really deliver on a lot of those cameos. Really, they're going to end up being cameos. And I unfortunately do think it's going to be Bad Batch focused. So it's going to be a really weird one, Sonic, I think, when this show is over, to think about, because it's almost going to be Book of Boba Fett-esque in a way, much better than Book of Boba Fett. Don't get me wrong,
Okay.
but it's going to be Book of Boba Fett-esque in a way where you're like, there are some things in the show that are absolutely amazing, and there are a lot of like really interesting, intriguing setup. But then there's also things that you're like, what does this have to do with anything, and how does it connect to the overall narrative of the show? And I think in that way, Bad Batch might feel disjointed depending on how they end this season and what's next coming in the future.
Yeah, and again, thanks for the question, David. And I think you're right. There is a lot to wrap up in 2 episodes. I am still of the belief that we're at least getting a double episode length for that finale. It would seem a little cheap, I would say, if it was just another 20-minute episode. I think people would be like feeling kind of how they did with Mando season three's ending and Ahsoka's ending, where it's like, okay, this episode that we got here in episode 13 of the Bad Batch, are we now gonna have that sort of feeling that we had with episode 7 of both of those seasons of the show, where it's like, okay, we got through a lot of cool things. These are some awesome things happening here. How are we gonna wrap it up? And I would say Ahsoka, there was always the fact that it was gonna have a season 2. There was no way it was just a single season show. That I think it allows me to enjoy a little bit more of like the A New Hope-esque, like hope with the heroes left behind, or a mix of like Empire situation, but A New Hope, like positivity, and the fact that we have teases of Thrawn. I was fine with that. I would argue that as much as I am a bit of a defender of Mando season 3, that final episode should have been longer, especially if it is now being primed essentially as like the end of the show. If you gave it like another 15, 20 minutes, I think you iron out a lot of things. And I will keep on repeating that, because I've been repeating that since 2019. Because if you gave an extra 15 or something minutes to the Rise of Skywalker, I think that introduction hits way better. We could have actually heard Palpatine instead of, hearing about stuff in Fortnite, right? And all that, his message to the galaxy, and maybe a clearer understanding of Mustafar and how it's been healing, and the Eye of the Webbish Bog could have added some really more creepy, interesting Force lore, the way that arguably the movie does really well. It adds so much to with the Sith Eternal and all this and that stuff, right? So this show with season 3, like Liam was saying, it didn't get any marketing. Season 2, I have the poster up here. It says the long road ahead, and it was. And I think that's what kind of hurt the show in the long run, because it's not like an impactful season in most ways. It's so character focused that season 3 had to almost be like how The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker feel for a lot of people. Like, no, get back to how we were in season 1, right? In some ways, you can argue that the first season and third season are like the J.J. Abrams Star Wars, and The Last Jedi-esque was season 2. I'd argue that, and it does flow a lot better, because it's still from the same writing team, same production team, all that. But in terms of like where the plot is progressing, I think that's why season 3 has been playing a lot of catch up, has been focusing on wrapping up some things, but then introducing new things that you're like, well, we didn't have time for this, right? Are we gonna go anywhere with this? And I think we are gonna get a back, like with how Ventress was essentially in a backdoor pilot. We're gonna get some sort of other early Dark Time show with a bit more of a flashy lead. The Bad Batch, as fun as they have grown to be and mature in their development, they're not like relevant to what Palpatine's ultimate plans is. Because at the end of the day, we know he comes back. They're not going to stop him coming back. At best, their legacy is that they, kept themselves alive through a lot of the initial clone purging, and dealt a temporary but significant blow, right? They are ultimately just clones. They're not going to become like these legendary heroes that are like referenced like in the same way that Rogue One is with the Rogue Squadron in the comics and their legacy, because the Death Star was destroyed. It's not going to be like this. Tantiss is not well known for this to become a major part of their story. They can only delay things, right? So yeah, I agree. Like Wolf, I thought once he was introduced, I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna bring him back. Nope. Cody,
Yeah.
nope. Right. Echo has showed up here and there. We're like, all right, what are we doing with him? Rampart disappeared for so long, right? I thought it would have been really interesting to bring him at the start of the season. They're not going to address all these things, because I think they're going to save them for Ventress, Voss, whoever else to kind of play around with Cad Bane, all these guys that are going to be bigger players, especially in this first half of the Dark Times. It feels inevitable that we're getting another show after this. And if we had a gut part of this show to just focus on the Bad Batch and focus on like one significant piece of the Rise of Skywalker, of like, oh, this is why Palpatine's plan didn't come to fruition earlier. Yeah, that's fine. I still think we are going to address why Omega is so important, more so than we have already. I still think there's another piece to that. I think we're going to still get a little bit more of what's going on those data paths that not Rampart, Hemlock has. So maybe we get to see like a Phase Zero Dark Trooper, like not like a very prototype stage, and it'll be like almost the closest thing that Star Wars animation gets to horror, right? With like the fact that it is a clone inside those like exosuits. That could be some piece of technology that Moff Gideon stumbles upon because he's managed to make his way to Tantiss or something, and then we continue his legacy in the Mandoverse. It'll be chunks like that. I think the best way to look at this end of the show is that it's going to be significant to like threads that are already complete or established in other mediums. And is it going to change how we look at them? Not necessarily, but it's giving context. And I think that's the healthiest way of looking at the show. It'll at the very least give context instead of feeling incomplete. It'll handle its story It'll make us feel like this part of episode 9 was better. This part of Mandoverse with Gideon's obsession with all this technology feel better. It'll be things like that. And then hopefully it'll be elevated as a show once more, the same way Rebels was once we get like a live action Omega or like an animated Omega in, the New Republic era or something. It doesn't feel like this show is gonna drop Omega and never bring her back, right? It's just that we're gonna finish this part of their story, and if we get to see Hunter again, if he somehow survives, I don't think it will be with Omega. I think at that point, Omega will be her own woman. She'll have grown. She'll be doing her own things. We don't know how her brothers also age. We don't really know if they're gonna survive that long just by their natural biology. So, I'm not worried so much about like the Bad Batch like failing to have a good ending. I think it's just now we've all realized we have to pull back and say, okay, at least focus on ensuring the Bad Batch as a group has a good ending, and the threads that are important that this third season has been hinting at least that they're established for other shows to pick up.
Yeah, and I think what this show has done, the optimistic way you can look at it, is the cameos, the references, all that stuff to the bigger picture. What they're almost doing is outlining the fact that the Bad Batch now are architects behind the scenes of almost everything big that might happen to the clones for the rest of their history, right? And so if you don't watch the Bad Batch, you probably won't end up missing much, unfortunately. But if you did watch it, you kind of know that these characters, none of this stuff that might happen to the clones in the future, whenever we see that, will have happened without the contributions of the Bad Batch. And so I think that's going to be the rewarding nature of the show. And I have no doubt the ending will be pretty good, because all the first two seasons, the finales of both seasons, were pretty good. Were they underwhelming and that they didn't tackle as many things as I'd hoped? Yes. But were they good, well-structured finales? Yes. So I think it is a bit of the choppiness of maybe having too many episodes and trying to fit a bunch of extra stuff in to keep people excited every week. Maybe studio mandate about, oh, bring these things back and why don't you try showing this, or what about this for an episode? Or maybe truly it is my new theory that they had these ideas, they thought the grand design would work. I think season 1 was higher viewed, obviously, because it was middle to end of pandemic times with early 2021. And then by the time we got towards season 2, the tracking for it, and then ultimately the viewership was a lot lower than they expected. And maybe they cut certain storylines because they were like, I don't know if we should put these could sell a bigger show than the Bad Batch. And ultimately, that's kind of what I'm starting to lean towards. But we'll see. We'll see. The ending might wrap up everything very nicely. It's not going to wrap up every plot line, but it might wrap up the biggest ones very nicely. Nerdy Zombie 83 says, howdy there, Nerdy Zombie. David Fieldson says, Clone Rebellion Project, Necromancer, Force Sensitive Kids. Is Omega Force Sensitive? How Rex and Co. end up fishing in Rebels.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot to address, and I'm beginning to think none of it will be dealt in within the Bad Batch. Well, I think the Force Sensitive Kids will be dealt with, and I don't think Omega's Force Sensitive. I feel like they're not going to answer that one, but they're going to leave it vague. But I think they've kind of already tried to answer it. They basically said her blood is just a pure conduit for helping replicate clones of Force sensitives, basically replicate midichlorians through whatever the Kaminoans did to make her blood so pure that they could use it. So I think in a way she's kind of the purest form of Kaminoan cloning. I don't think it's going to be that she's Force sensitive. So I feel like if they don't fully like outright say the answer to that, I think we can all just safely assume that's the answer. I too, David, would like it to be very clear. I'd like them to spell it out. I like that they treat us like we don't need things spelled out, but sometimes when there's all these theories and stuff out there, it'd be nice if they just confirmed or denied them. But the Force sensitive kids thing, I think, will mostly wrap up. Clone Rebellion will not happen in this show, but my theory since like episode 4 or 5 of this season has been that maybe this is the catalyst point that launches the Clone Rebellion from the future, wakes the rest of the clones up, all the clones on Tantiss. maybe some clones like Wolf are in the other areas. This is the Bad Batch, maybe whether they die or whether they're just that ultimate symbol. Whatever Omega and the Bad Batch do is that thing that really launches the clones into the future of like, we can see that the Empire is not treating us well. We don't need to serve them loyally. Maybe we see a real big speech from Rex in the vein of what we saw from Hauser in season 1. Hauser's still around, probably going to be part of the finale of the show. Maybe we get to see that, but I think whatever is coming this ending, what the Bad Batch does here might provide that catalyst, that hope for this is what our future could look like, and this is what we need to fight for. I'm still of the mind that might be the biggest thing we see, but I don't think every little plot point and every little cameo is going to be addressed in this finale.
Yeah, and adding to that Clone Rebellion part, it's fair to say we're not going to see our big hitters, right? And the Bad Batch has been very reluctant to team up with Rex and do things for Rex's rebellion, right? They're like, no, we our focus is Omega, our focus is on ourselves, staying out of trouble as best as we can, right? But let's say, for example, whoever survives manages to get Omega and the kids out, and in a way that they can never be tracked again. Maybe they jump to random coordinates and they're like, you know what? Uh, and I don't want to feel like it's too Rebels-esque with Ezra, but if they like jump to somewhere that only like the Tantiss computers or something have, but then they destroy all evidence, they're like, one day we'll come back, but the rest of you guys, this is proof that hey, it is possible to be a clone and have a life worth living and not just be a cog in the machine. This is the blow that we dealt. We saved all these children, all that. But the best thing we can do is to get out of the fight, right? But you guys are still here. You guys can continue on, right? We have to do this because it's necessary to protect our family. But the rest of you guys, like, if you need meaning, like, hey, a couple of these clones came and saved us. Our brothers came. At the end of the day, we were called the Bad Batch, but when push came to shove, right, we were all clones together fighting to save these kids and all that. It could be cheesy, and I think it'll be a little. Yeah, we don't want to veer into like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, like of monologuing out there, but we can get something well written. We've seen Andor handle them. I wouldn't be shocked to see like a fairly solid monologue from Rex as a part of like an inspirational call, as like a here's a summary of what just happened, guys. But they're not going to be able to touch because we're the clones. We'll stick for ourselves and protect our own. And then that maybe they'll try to like group together over time, but that message probably backfires in a way. I can see the clones be hunted out, removed, forced to be brain shipped again, like, or double down. We could see a little bit more of the torture happen, unfortunately, and that will force clones to rebel more. And I don't know. As much as I want to see like a Battlefront 2 2005-esque rebellion, I don't know. I think the Empire is going to squash them. It's going to be rough, but at least they're gonna fight as long as they can until it's just a couple of them left, fishing on Cetos, or not Cetos. What is that planet called from Rebels that they're on?
Rebels. I don't remember. It's
Yeah,
been too long.
just
But
they're gonna have to be like, we're the last ones that stuck around. Like we fought the good fight, but in some ways maybe we brought it on ourselves.
yeah, I mean, in that way, like I can see a rebellion happening on Tantiss. I just can't see like the galaxy wide actual war between the clones and the stormtroopers starting fully in this show. Like I could see, I mean, I very much so could see the end of the show. The Bad Batch get cornered. Omega's there. Rex is there. Rex gives a speech. Omega gives a speech. The rest of the clones kind of look at each other and they're like, they drop their weapons, or they decide to not shoot the Bad Batch, and Hemlock's yelling at them, and they have that kind of moment. I could see that it would very much so echo what we saw with Hauser in season 1, and I would love to see something like that come full circle, because it would make the strength of seeing these clones, the clone plight throughout this show that really hasn't connected much to the Bad Batch main story, all start to come together. But ultimately, I don't see like the further stakes of the show really getting into a galaxy-wide conflict. But here's hoping there is more into the future. We got Toydarian Dan super chat. Thank you so much. Says thanks for all the great knowledge and content you guys bring each week. Keep it up. Thank you so much, Toydarian Dan. We appreciate your support, and we always appreciate everybody who's commenting along and joining us for these streams. So thank you guys so much. It really helps us out and helps us keep going with these streams into the future. Next question. Where were we here? Nerdy Zombie says, do you think Ventress's appearance is a pilot to Tales of the Bounty Hunter, and it will have Ventress and Voss doing Dark Disciple and Boba Fett? That's what me and my dad think. That's an interesting theory. I think it could be possible, whether it's a Ventress Voss show, whether it is... I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen with Ventress. I think at this point, a pilot is possible, but also just reintroduction is possible. I think anything's on the table for Ventress. We had the discussion last week a little bit about, is she possibly a character who could show up in Tales from the Empire, because Tales of the Empire has Morgan Elsbeth, who a lot of her episodes are taking place on Dathomir, and obviously Ventress has a strong connection to the Night Sisters in Dathomir because she is one. So could we see her in that? And I think it's possible to see her in that and track that progression. I mean, we do know that Dave, the showrunners did say Dave Filoni had the idea to bring her back, which is something that makes me think that there is a possible connection between maybe live action Ventress in the Ahsoka show, or something that connects to Thrawn or Dathomir, because we are going to see Dathomir in that show. I think there's a lot of things on the table for Ventress. Hopefully books aren't one of them, because they apparently don't respect exactly what happens to these characters in the books. But Tales of the Bounty Hunter would be really interesting, and I would love to see these Tales of series to just start happening maybe twice a year or once a year. It really should. They, since they're only 6 episodes long, I think they could very much so do it. And we'll see what they try to do with animation here post Bad Batch, because they won't have a flagship animated show. So that would be interesting, Nerdy Zombie. Maybe that's like a surprise release here in the later half of the year, that Ventress, Voss. I don't know if the first thing they do will be to readapt Dark Disciple, because they just retcon Dark Disciple. So I don't know why you'd adapt it, like bring them back just to adapt it. I think the first thing they would do would be go beyond Dark Disciple, and if that's successful, go back and adapt it into animation, or finalize the animation they originally had it ready to get before. So that would be my thoughts. But yeah, cool idea.
I mean, I don't remember where I read it, but I feel like there have been interviews where they're like, we could always go back to the Clone Wars, but like this is like the right ending to end with Siege of Mandalore, right? And as much as I like Siege of Mandalore, it does burn me a little bit that we don't get Crystal Crisis, because that is such an important arc for Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship. It ties super well to Obi-Wan Kenobi as a show, right? If anything, I thought that fireside scene there would have been adapted to live action, and then bam, we like kind of go into present day or something like that, or like Obi-Wan wakes out of a dream, or nightmare, whichever one, right? But they didn't, and it's fully done, it's fully voiced. It's just not, the animation was never finished, but they consider it canon. It's super important to Rogue One and the Death Star and everything else too. And it's like, well, if you got it, why don't you finish it, right? And it's the same thing with Dark Disciple. They've hinted that it's done, they just never released it out there. And we saw Bad Batch, right? That arc of Bad Batch in the Clone Wars was 95% released. They made some slight changes. The weirdest one to me was more that they cut out like the droid, that specific droid that they made, and how it like affects human, like organic matter. They just cut it out. They just imply it, and even though they show plenty of other violence throughout the rest of that arc, but like they can do it. They clearly have everything there. It's just the top layer, essentially, and especially with how they've been saying it's become so much cheaper to do the Clone Wars animation. We perfected it after all these years. Like, why not, right? But I will push back against a Tales of the Bounty Hunters being the place to adapt that. Dark Disciple is 8 episodes of a Clone Wars show, right? That it is what 24, like 170, 180 minutes if we're just going by average episode lengths of the Clone Wars. Like, it is long. It's not meant to be just, a movie that you can compile out there. It's not meant to be shorts. And if you want to reference like cut out scenes and then use it in like the Hidden Path show and or Tales of the Bounty Hunter show, if they have an episode with Voss or with Ventress, that's fine. And then maybe you can shrink out whatever's left and make it one big like super animated film. Like, I guess you could do that, but I think that's the worst way to handle that. The book works as a medium change because books you can kind of go as long as you want. Theoretically, you can get deeper into the character motivations, and it is a very dark and mature story, even by Clone Wars standards, right? So Tales of the Bounty Hunters, no, especially because those are like 10, 15-minute shorts. I think it makes sense for characters that are popular, but they're never really been characters per se. Um, Barris is in that situation where she's a lot more fleshed out in EU. But then what we got from George Lucas and Filoni was like she's got a cool like relationship with Ahsoka, like being of similar age and personality. Maybe not personality, but like they work well together. And then she disappears for 3 seasons, and then you're like, why did she like become essentially a Jedi terrorist? Like, even if she has good reasons, why to such a degree? And we don't know that, but these shorts with her, you can still flash back for like a couple minutes and understand how her life was changing throughout the Clone Wars while still staying in the present day story and keep that for over the 3 episodes. What happens with Ventress and with Quinlan, it's so many places, it's so many characters, it's so impactful to the Jedi, it's and to the Sith. It's not something I would put into a Tales of show. I would need it to be, if you're gonna adapt it, like almost like a Demon Slayer adapts like it's some of its arcs into movies and then brings it into the next season. It's got to be something like that where you still keep 80 to 90% of what was in the book, what was in the original animatics, and it's an 8 episode arc originally. It was going to be the longest thing we ever had in the Clone Wars. So no, I'm gonna have to push back on that a little bit because I think you're doing a disservice to the show. But I agree with what you're saying here, Liam. Like it reference it, and if what we see past Ventress's reintroduction is exciting or like has direct connections back to that the events that resulted in her dying in the first place before her resurrection, then with people's interest and all that, yeah, release it as another Clone Wars arc, right? People would love to see like, oh wow, the Clone Wars is back again for like 1 week, right? Like people would love to tune in again. That's a great way to keep that show going and fleshing out the full 10 seasons that were originally planned out for it. So I'd say that Tales of the Bounty Hunters, it's a good place to introduce, in my mind, different eras of bounty hunters, right? You can get characters that are more popular in different mediums too, right? A Valance is a very popular 1970s comic character that they brought back into canon with the bounty hunters line, and he's become such a rich character. I'd love to see him have like to be part of a party here. I'd love to see the Crimson Corsair and things that are happening on Jakku, which were like so heavily focused on in the marketing of The Force Awakens with a lot of like the junior novels and all that, but were completely cut out of that movie. And then maybe see some things in like the Acolyte era, the High Republic era, and see how Dave Lampop or something connects to some of these bigger characters that we see in these bigger shows and movies. I think that's how you handle um, tales of shows with bounty hunters specifically. If you bring Boba in, it's just like, oh man, I don't know. There's a lot that I want to address, especially after the Book of Boba Fett. Do I want to now make this show necessarily watch to kind of fix out and smoothen out some edges and explain away things about his character? No. With the time crunch of these episodes, just make it fun and make it a story worth telling in 45 minutes max.
Colton Smith says this needs to be a large 2-part finale to the show. Season has been great, but has to close strong for any lasting legacy. Yeah, Colton, I'm hoping it's 2 parts. I mean, we keep waiting for them to start kind of hyping up the finale. Really, the most they've done is release a TV spot to hype up the last 4 episodes, but they haven't really put much into the marketing of the show, and so hopefully they really start to put something out there that gets people hyped for the finale and makes us realize that it is a longer finale than we think it is. But right now, I'm really starting to think it's only the 24-minute, 26-minute episode that we get every week. But we will see. Dirty Zombie says they could do the Cad Bane and Boba duel in the Tales of the Bounty Hunters. That would be awesome to see.
Yeah.
I mean, Tales of the Bounty Hunters might happen eventually. I do think it's a strong possibility. You know, for me, I'm really hoping for that from the Mos Eisley Cantina first, so we can get the Figrin Dan story as well as Tales from Jabba's Palace, so we can get the Max Rebo story first. But you know, Cad Bane versus Boba Fett, yeah, it would be cool to see that eventually.
I mean, we've gotten the Return of the Jedi one shots in the comics and Tales. There was a big Dark Horse Tales of Java, so I think that
Mhm.
one's gonna have to be unfortunately shelved for a little bit here. Uh, I would love to see a little bit more of Max though. For like he's there's no way he's dead, right?
No.
He definitely was on sick leave. He was just like had too much fun at a party, and he
Yeah.
was like, Garza Whip, I'm not feeling great. And she's like, you know what, Max? You've been a star. I gotta give you the star treatment once in a while. All right. So I'm
Yeah.
sure he's not there. Like, come on. Of course not.
He's a survivor. I mean,
Of
he
course.
survived Jabba's sail barge. He's not gonna get blown up by a bomb. So
Yeah,
he's
exactly,
good.
Aaron.
He's all good.
Exactly. And I mean, his comics one shots have been like very strangely emotional for him as a character. So I really don't think he's like a guy that just if we it would do injustice to just have him in the background, right? If you're gonna bring him, make him like the glue of the entire original trilogy because he is that guy. It's just we didn't see him. That's all. He's the reason why Mos Eisley was relatively peaceful, right? And not overrun by the daimyos and the huts and all that, right? He was a glue guy. Everyone liked him, so everyone was like, all right, if Max is there, we're there, right? And we're going to be cool, right? That's how I look at that guy. But sorry, where were we at with the question here? Completely lost
Skywalker's
myself.
Academy says, I hope everyone that the Bad Batch helped comes in with the cavalry.
Yes.
That would have been cool when Cad Bane captured. Oh wait, that's a different comment.
Oh
Okay,
no, no, it
yeah,
was a Cad Bane one. Yeah.
cavalry. Next episode, cavalry. I think it's going to be a lot of the people the Bad Batch helped. I think it's going to be more so focused on the clones, though, and this. I think that's the one thing that'll be clone centric. Here's to hoping that the Martez sisters aren't showing back up, and Sid and all these other random characters who I don't want to see again. But I would love to see those clones show back up. Maybe we finally get a little bit more confirmation that Rex and Cody have met up or something. Sometime because Wolf and Cody are very different places because we know Cody went AWOL. Like we know that
Yeah.
from the show. Wolf, we don't know what happens to him after that. We assume eventually he goes AWOL because we see him in Rebels, but we don't know whether that was the moment that made him go AWOL or whether it's going to be something in this episode of the Bad Batch or it's something in the future. So we'll see. But yeah, I would love to see at least a lot of the clones who have been in this show back up in the cavalry.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'd love to see like some characters from the 212th and all that, like clones that we've never even seen in the show that have been recruited over time. Characters from the 501st that weren't with Ahsoka. Like, I'd love to see a few more like Clone Wars faces, but we've like only seen them in for like an episode or two, and they were a supporting character. Just throw them in there, like show the scale of this cavalry. Right? It should not. It should feel like if a great example is like Two Towers with the Battle of Helm's Deep. Right? It should feel like once Rex comes, he's got a force behind him, and that's what ensures the escape of Omega and all that. It shouldn't just feel like I've got 10 guys who can turn the tide against an entire facility that is full of advanced tech, potential dark troopers, and whatever secret. I love in my mind. I would love if like everything is going like relatively well and Omega is victorious. The kids are escaping. The Bad Batch are doing pretty well, and then suddenly they bring out the big guy. If they bring out the what's the monster's name again? The one from season 2 that was also on the experimental ship from the Clone Wars.
Oh, the Zilla Beast.
The Zilla Beast, like if you just imagine, so it's like, all right, I got to pull out the big guns here to stop this. Like if these people are going to destroy my technology, I'm going to make sure I destroy everything as well here, right? I'd love something crazy like that to happen, to then force the cavalry to be like, all right, we really have to come in hot. But it's not going to happen that way. And I want to quickly jump back to nerdy zombies with the Boba Fett and Cad Bane thing. I'm pretty sure we've got confirmation from like character designs that he's got the skull cap. He has the skull cap in Book of Boba Fett, so we know that they have their duel. We know that it happened. I think it would be great for that show because you don't necessarily have to make it like 80 minutes long of a journey. I think you can essentially tell it in like 15 minutes and then show why they start to break up, right? So it could be a great place to do it, in my opinion. But
yeah,
to be seen.
But you could do that whole a whole 3-episode arc about Cad Bane and Boba Fett if you did a Tales from the Bounty Hunters.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because this season, well, in general, Dave Filoni being the one who writes and runs the Tales of series, or at least as far as we know, I don't think it's 100% confirmed, or they haven't really said anything about who's running Tales from the Empire, but that was the big thing they were emphasizing back at Celebration 2022 when Tales of the Jedi was announced and they showed the trailers and stuff. Was this is a Dave Filoni side project, and his heart's still in animation, even if he now is a live action filmmaker and is now running a lot of major aspects of Lucasfilm. His heart's still in animation, and so he wants to keep going back here as kind of a little side therapy project almost. So it seems like all the characters he's tackling are characters that he either, one, didn't get to finish what he wanted to do with them in the Clone Wars, or two, their characters kind of related to Ahsoka. And so we'll see, because Cad Bane and Boba Fett aren't really related to Ahsoka. So if they ever do Bounty Hunters, I think that would be awesome, because Cad Bane obviously is one of his characters, but I'm not 100% convinced Bounty Hunters is next, but I would love to see it. Next up is, where were we here? Skywalker's Academy. Said that would have been cool when Cad Bane captured her the first or second time. Well, when Cad Bane kidnapped the baby, I guess there wasn't the second time. Not quite sure what you're talking about there. It was probably something to do with the conversation we were having earlier, and I can't remember what that conversation was, so sorry about that. Jake Pettit says, are we ever going to see Cody again? Maybe the last episodes, but we do need to explain. Did he die? Is he working with other clones? I don't know. Yeah, Jake, I kind of just mentioned Cody, so we won't dive too much into this, but it would be really nice to at least know what happened to him. And again, it follows up on the kind of obnoxious nature of the cameos in this show. Like, I felt like the cameos in Mandalorian, so many people want to go at Mandalorian season 2 as being a cameo fest, and while it does have a lot of cameos, I always felt like those cameos all contributed to the progression of the narrative of the show. The show was about finding a Jedi to train Grogu. That was the point of the season. And every time, whether it was Bo-Katan, whether it was Ahsoka, whether it was Luke, all those characters lead to that finale. Boba Fett might have been the only one that was kind of out of nowhere, but he ultimately played a bigger role in the story of the Mandalorian and Mandalorians. So I think that show handled its cameos in the right way, where you can have cameos, but they all are important to the progression of the narrative. In this show, we have had a lot of cameos, whether it be Ventress or kind of Cody now. Although Cody did help Crosshair learn something, it was a good arc for Crosshair, good episode for Crosshair, but it's been so long that it feels a little extraneous. Wolf, there's so many cameos in this show that just feel like cameos just to have something to put on the poster or put in a trailer. I mean, the Ventress one really just feels like something to put in the trailer, because that was the big selling point of that trailer. That was the thing we were all reacting to, all excited for. And right now it's just been a 1-episode thing that really could have been a throwaway episode, right? Like, that's the most filler episode, I feel like, in the entire show so far, if Ventress doesn't come back into the fold, because it really doesn't have anything to do with anything. It's more of just playing up the theories about Omega being force sensitive. Is she really force sensitive? That's kind of the only thing it accomplishes. But in a way, a lot of these other episodes have kind of explained that away, that she's not. So we didn't really need that episode, and so in a lot of ways that's the super frustrating thing about that. But so in my opinion, I would really like to see Cody again, but I'm not going to bet on it. But I want to know what happens to him. He's one of my favorite clones because Obi-Wan's my favorite character and favorite Jedi, and so growing up I've always loved Cody. He's also one of the only ones that gets actual name drop in the movies. So that was awesome. I loved Cody. I want to know what happens to him, and it is disappointing that we haven't seen him in a season and a half now.
Yeah. I mean, it is what the show has become. I will always say that the clone cameos make more sense, but even Wolf, it's like, all right, I wanted to know at least like what's happening with Wolf, or like why has he become the kind of crazed, paranoid guy that he is in Rebels when we first see him. He's so normal. If anything, he's almost like too good of a guy. He's like, dude, what are you doing to CX2? And again, we haven't seen CX2 in a while either. Like he has been, especially in this third season, pushed in the second half as like this is our real villain of the show for the clones themselves, this Bad Batch, and then Hemlock is like the villain from the Imperial grander plan of it against the clones as a whole. And we haven't seen him in a while either, right? And so why is Ventress there? Yeah, I mean, it sucks, but I think it's because she's gonna have a different show, and I guess this is just a way to get people excited about the third season. I hope people have been sticking around because this has been a good season of animation compared to season two for a lot of people, compared to season one. So it's just one of those things. That's I think if we harp on Cody too much, then we forget that, like you said, he helped Crosshair out, but he also was a good like he had in his way that Rex had his like final Clone Wars battle in Rebels. Cody in his way had his own Clone Wars reality check where it's like, the war is over. I'm not trying to start another one. And then he gets the Imperial release, and the Imperial's like, shoot, like kill him. And he's like, are you kidding me? I just gave my word. And then obviously Crosshair is still messed up at this point, and he does the job here. But it's a way to like set him up as like, all right, that was the chip, guys. Nothing more. He's dealing with the legacy of his actions. He's dealing with the fact what he did to Obi-Wan and all that. We'll get to him when it's necessary, and it may never be. He could just be a guy who goes AWOL, dies alone, and that could be depressing, especially because he is a name-dropped clone who is so impactful. But if anything, isn't that one of the more realistic things, that these clones just disappear to nothingness, even though they are there in the galaxy? They just age out, right? He ages out alone, and then that's it. They could do that if they really wanted to, but again, this is Star Wars. I'm sure they're gonna make some cool story for him.
Nerdy Zombie 83 says, me and my dad believe that Crosshair is the template for the Death Troopers. Interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about Death Troopers since that little cameo of the original design a few episodes ago. The CX clones might be predating that, and they were trying to turn Crosshair into a CX clone. CX clones obviously have high marksmanship, so maybe there's something to do with Crosshair's DNA that they used to possibly amplify CX clones' abilities in the marksmanship territory. That could be interesting if that carries over to Death Troopers. I could see that. I don't know if I would say template for Crosshair, but I would say maybe a lot of Crosshair's natural ability or programmed ability in his DNA or his mutation could be something that they apply to the Dark Troopers or the Death Troopers. You mean? So the Death Troopers.
Yeah.
That's also interesting. Death Troopers, I don't know if I see that necessarily for Death Troopers. I see it more for a well-equipped, multifaceted Dark Trooper than I do for the Death Troopers, because Death Troopers are they're more like an evolution of CX Troopers in a way, I feel like, because the CX Troopers not like they don't talk. They're very stoic, mission oriented. I don't know. It's an interesting look at it, but I don't see Crosshair still. I think my thoughts still stand where I don't see Crosshair as the template for anything. Like I feel like you can pick and choose parts of his mutation and experiment with his DNA to create and try to force that mutation in a way on other clones, but I don't know if you can necessarily be like he was created from ground zero to have this whole force of other troopers to be built out from him.
I agree. I don't see. I think CX evolves into our debt troopers, and I don't think Ahsoka's the best example of like what a debt trooper is like under their helmet. But we know they're not really like talking the same way as like humans or clones would. They're almost like biologically monster, like Frankenstein creatures. Whereas you know, dark troopers have always been more technologically aligned. So, I think the idea is that he's a great marksman and he could have become a CX. But I don't think a dark trooper is necessarily the next step for Crosser. What could have been a route for him. He's not really a guy that needs extra technology. He's been biologically mutated. Then if you're adding on all this equipment and all of this technology around him, I think you just kind of take away his strengths, if anything.
Skywalker's Academy says Dark Times Reign of the Empire could be a generic enough title for the next series. I'd love to see an Heir to the Empire era series more though. Me too. I want an animated show that pairs with the with everything we're seeing, but focuses on the main characters, Luke, Leia, and Han. That would be my preferred step next. But they're never, in my opinion, I would like to see a different animation style if you're going to go into the future, because I like keeping it fresh as much as I love the Clone Wars animation style. I don't think that needs to be the end all be all animation style for Star Wars. So if you're going to do that, it might be a completely different show with completely different showrunners, completely different animation style. The Clone Wars animation, they perfected it. They put in a lot of money, even in the Disney era, to perfect it. There's no way it's going away or just relegated to these tales of things that are going to happen once every 2 to 3 years. I think I said last week, I think Dark Times might be the name of the next show, and I would love that. I think
Yeah.
I think it could be, you could do it like Clone Wars, basically. Like you're saying, a generic title, Skywalker's Academy, using the title Dark Times is generic enough that you could tell stories from so many different perspectives in 3 episode arcs and get that kind of formula back that we love about Clone Wars so much, because that would be something that's really interesting, and carry it all the way up to whether you want to carry it to Obi-Wan or carry it to Solo or carry it all the way up to maybe Andor. There's a lot of time you can mess around and play with it, and you can have clone arcs, you can have Jedi arcs, you could go to the path, you could do Ventress and Quinlan arc, you could do Boba Fett arcs, you could do Vader arcs, you could do anything that has anything to do with that time period. It doesn't have to be good guy focused, it doesn't have to be Empire focused, it could be anything. And so that would be something incredibly exciting. It would be the most ambitious show they have launched since the original 2008 version of this Clone Wars animation style. And so if they were to announce, like if the Bad Batch ended and we got Book of Boba Fett style announcement at the very end in a post-credit scene or something, that the Dark Times is the next show, and it's going to have a little mini sizzle reel for possible release next year for season 1. That would be absolutely insane, and I would love it. But I think something generic like that. We don't know how much time the Bad Batch has covered either. Right now, I would guess at least 2 years. I'd
Yeah.
guess at least we're in 18 or 19 BBY, because we started, 18 or 17, because we started in 19. So we still have, even if we're in 17 BBY, that means you have 17 more years worth of material to cover up to A New Hope. So why not? I mean, you have a Vader animated model. You have so many Palpatine. You have all these characters. Like you have everyone. Might as well, right? Let's do it. Come on. I'm hyped for that show.
Yeah. And I was thinking about like what you're saying, what putting in Vader and all that. And I was like, I don't know. That might start trampling over like Charles Soule's Darth Vader line and all that. But timeline wise, Bad Batch almost works as like a nice little stopgap to like cover a lot of those comics, a lot of those early
Mm-hmm.
canon media where it's like what happens right after with these characters, how they transform. So yeah, you can do that. You can still do crazy cool Inquisitor stuff. We've already gotten rid of like old big name Jedi from the Council, but you can still have like I don't know. You can still have other Jedi show up here. Uh, you can have entirely as sad as it might be to say, you could have almost like a parallel to the Kanan uh, Ezra storyline, but just have it with Balin and like an apprentice or
Yeah,
something, and then be like,
yeah, Balin.
Balin like cuts them down. He's like, I can't deal with this weakness. Like this is not the Jedi way. I can't believe like you would continue our traditions when we know like we have to be more than what they were, right? We can do cool things with characters like that, more so than like a Vader. I'd still say that still have like imagery, but you can use Vader like you did in Rebel Season 2, and I think that's perfect for Dark Times.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things they could do. It's really the biggest umbrella story that we could possibly have. And this would be the best part, Sanak, right? We don't have to do the Dark Times anymore after this. It could just be the show. And then we
Yeah,
can move on. We can do other eras. We can focus on other things. If we had the one show that was all Dark Times, finally, Andor will end. We'll finally move on to other time periods now
me
because
too.
all we seem to focus on is Dark Times. And as much as we've been like, yeah, let's move on from Dark Times, it would be awesome to just have that definitive Dark Times show. Like it's been great
Yeah,
to have perspectives in a more elevated sense in Andor. It's been good to have Obi-Wan's story kind of told, Han's story kind of told, a variety of different stories told, but we haven't had that definitive like Clone Wars version of Dark Times. And why not? Then we can finally move on. We can finally just focus in on New Republic. And I think the reason I'm not 100% sold on New Republic yet is because I think they want Filoni and Favreau to really craft out what that era is. And
yeah,
until that stuff is done, I feel like the animation won't come in unless it's supplementary to it. And if it is supplementary to it, they're not going to take big swings or big risks unless it's a Dave Filoni run show. Like if it's directly run by Filoni or directly produced by Filoni, or even if he's just part of the writer's room, maybe we'll see something with some stakes. But I just worry about a New Republic era show, unless it's early New Republic, pre Mandalorian, like in between the fall of the Empire at Jakku in 5 ABY and the beginning of the Mandalorian in 9 ABY. If it's something that takes place between those 4 years and focuses on our main heroes or focuses on the early establishment of the New Republic, that's fine. I think that would be something interesting. But I don't see it crossing over into the actual Mandalorian timeline unless they're either one done with the shows they're telling. So Ahsoka's over, the Filoni movie's out, Mandalorian movie's done, all that stuff is wrapped up, and the big Thrawn plotline is wrapped up, or it's supplementary to that and then never really tackles anything that's all that interesting or important. So that would be my one hesitation with completely jumping over into New Republic. Like I think even jumping past New Republic could be a little bit better for the wait. Like if you wanted to get into something directly before Force Awakens or something, finally tackling the fall
please.
of Ben Solo and going with Luke Skywalker and the Jedi Academy and all that. You could do that, but I worry about diminishing animation by connecting it to the Mandalorian unless they have a real story to tell. Because we still have another. We keep forgetting about Skeleton Crew, but there's still another Mandalorian era show coming, and there's so much content in that period that like I would like them to explore the other years outside of 9 ABY.
Yeah, no, I'm in full agreement, and I think Lucasfilm representatives have like shot it down of like that rumor of like they're doing some live action shorts of Leia and Han and Luke, right? And maybe that's a way to like prep people and keep the budget low before they show up in the movie or something, right? It's no heir to the Empire show, but maybe that's a way to be like, okay, guys, this is what they're doing right before the Mandalorian movie, or like right before Mandalorian and Grogu in that little transition period between the two. But if you want to see what they were doing while everything was breaking out in The Mandalorian, here's like their story being told in an animated show, right? I still think you could do Rangers of the New Republic or Rogue Squadron or something like that in animation, uh,
That would be
right?
cool.
I would
Jedi Rogue
appreciate that.
Squadron.
Yeah, I would appreciate that so you can just have a lot more like EUS characters show up again with new ones and build off of like some of the cooler canon characters that have been in comics and all that, and like keep it still small scale before that whole era explodes. Because you can do so much in those first 5 years after the Battle of Jakku. I don't think we have to let Filoni and Favreau gatekeep that era. Gatekeep everything onwards from Mando season 1, but not before. Like we want to still see like when the New Republic was working to some degree, right? I know it very quickly has problems, but where is that transition from the rebellion to the New Republic? We still haven't seen that. I know we kind of see it in the Aftermath trilogy, but there's still a lot there that is just like bootlegged and strapped together, right? It's not entirely there. And I love that expansion of Rise of Kylo Ren. Let's do a story before that and make Lor San Tekka one of the big leads there and connect it to the High Republic and all that stuff too, because they're so important as a family. Do that. I want a Clone Wars-esque show for the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
Just do it, man. Like, no one cares about Star Wars allegiances. That's not a great comic series. You can step over. You can work around it too if you really have to as well. You can bring Aftab and Akbar's son and make him see what he's doing to start off his initial work with the Resistance. All that. You can do so much in that 1 year and make the
Right.
characters way more. And you can bring like Eye of the Webbish Bog back, right, on Mustafar. You can show the Corvix and like how Mustafar's changing. You can have Luke haunting Ben Solo like he tells he would at the end of The Last Jedi, and it never happens in The Rise of Skywalker, right? You can do all these things to make the connectivity between the movies so much better, right? It's there. It's an option. Do that and keep it to 2 seasons before you get into a big show again, right? That requires a budget in the same way as like what we're talking about here with the Dark Times.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And in a lot of ways, Resistance had the right idea. I just think there wasn't the financial support nor the viewership behind it, and the
Yeah.
writing wasn't on point.
Or the
But
characters and maybe
yeah, no,
everything.
it didn't take itself seriously. It was just kind
Yeah.
of a show to try to capitalize on the success of the sequels. And I think they hoped they could just kind of half-ass it and be another big success following how hyped everybody was post Rebels and how financially successful and big the sequels seemed to be with general audience members, even if there was some dissension by the time Resistance came out with fans post Last Jedi. But
Yeah.
I think they kind of just thought, oh, people will jump on board, and then realized that nobody's jumping on board. But they had the right idea. Like I think if you start a show maybe a year prior to The Force Awakens and you carry it all the way up and through The Rise of Skywalker, that would also be really interesting. Kind of that Lost Stars treatment almost
Right. Yeah.
of the sequel trilogy. That would also be very cool. So it is an hour and a half. We usually stop around here. We'll do a couple more questions, guys. So sorry if we don't get to all of them, but keep sending them in. And if you absolutely want something to get answered, feel free to send in that super chat, and we will get to it. But we appreciate you guys for a lot of great questions and comments, and a really fun discussion here tonight. So thanks so much for joining, as always. All right, so the next thing we have here is David Fieldsen says, if I knew for sure they're planning on another animated show to address some of these unanswered questions from the Bad Batch, I feel a lot better about enjoying the Bad Batch. But with Disney Star Wars, who knows? The animation is becoming so superb, it would be a real shame if they didn't continue the style in another show. Yeah, David, I think we completely agree with that comment. I mean, it's just, I don't doubt that they will be bringing this animation style into more shows. I really don't. I just think the money they put into it and the way it's improved just in every level over the years is something that they are absolutely going to use. It's an asset you can't just shelve. You have to do something with it, whether it's a show, whether it's some original movies, whether it's more seasons of the Tales of style, where maybe it's just a 2 to 3 times a year, 6 episode drops, something. They're not going to completely get rid of this. They put too much money into it. But I would also feel a lot better about knowing the that we're going to have a lot of cliffhangers or a lot of things unanswered by the end of this show if we did actually know that Dark Time show or something was coming next.
Yeah, and I think David, you mentioned a little later here, like it'd be great if there's like a surprise 16th episode and then they show off like an epilogue that leads us into this Dark Time show. Yeah, I would love that. It is surprising that they said 15 when the last 2 seasons have been 16. Why cut it short in the final season that arguably you would need to add an extra episode to really hit all the things that we thought were going to be handled here in this season. So Yeah, I hope we get a Book of Boba Fett still sort of style there. And I do think this animation should just be stuck with the Clone Wars to Dark Times. If it gets to other eras, it's fine, right? Especially like how we're seeing with New Republic scenes and Tales of the Empire. I think that's okay, but I don't think main shows should continue this animation. It's great, but it's also been used again and again and again. We don't want everything in Star Wars to feel the same. You don't have to love Resistance, but I love the cell animation on it. It was beautiful in some of its more kinetic action moments. And I will say, if Resistance had focused a little bit more on how season one had used the First Order troops and how they slowly kind of took over the station and like parlay that more into season two instead of kind of abandoning that. I would have liked it. The only other cool First Order thing they brought was like relic hunters to kind of make like a Hitler Kylo Ren parallel there, but it never really was like expanded on there. And I don't think they should have gone too far either because it's like, all right, like he still needs to be redeemed. Um, but you know, we've also been harping so much on this channel, like Celebration 2025. It's in Japan. People have really responded well to visions. Why not do like a big budget show with like a Mark Hamill with Japanese animation in the sequel era with Ben Solo, this and that, right? Like go big with a new animation style, bring in a new audience that has been getting more and more teases with manga and all that. Do that, right? You're at the end of the day, there's gonna be a bunch of people who see this animation, say it looks cool, but be like, oh, I saw that back when I was a kid, right? They might, unless they're actually paying attention to the story, they might even think it's the same thing. You see like a full Japanese anime of Luke Skywalker in his like prime, people will be like, oh, I want to see that. That looks so different than what has been on TV for so long, for well over a decade, right? So keep it to the dark times. Use Tales of if you want to touch on different eras so that we can have some visual connectivity. But if you're going to really deal with bigger stories, let them go expand themselves, right? Like if anything, if they continued into dark times with this animation, I would think that they're saving their money to kind of push to another big era, big show where, you know, they can do a lot of that initial groundwork that every first season, especially in animation, really needs.
Yeah, and I mean, anime would be amazing if you could have that as supplementary, and I think that would be awesome too because it wouldn't be made in house, right? Like you could do what the High Republic's been doing in a way, which is like you have a Japanese creator create the manga, but there's also, you know, one of the writing team from the story group of the High Republic is also part of the
Yeah.
writing team because they are familiar with the lore. But you could do that where you could give story group answers to an animation studio and just have it all made in Japan, and it could be a supplementary show. It doesn't have to be your main show. Like
Yeah.
that would be awesome to have multiple shows for Star Wars and animation at the same time. Obviously, not releasing on the same time, but you know what I mean. Same year. So yeah, that would be really cool. Here's to hoping. So we'll get to one more question here because this is, I think, a question that leads into next week again, and it is CX2. Is his identity still a question, or is he just gone? What's going to happen with that character next episode? I, God, and I love Skywalker's Academy
It's
comments. It's
Maroc.
Marok. It absolutely is Marok. It's Marok and Snoke combined.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
no, you know, I feel like I have felt like the identity of that character doesn't really matter, but also you know they've lingered on him so much they've made him a main villain. I just think what they're possibly doing is propping this character up to be, you know, somebody who's super powerful, similar skill set to Crosshair, so when Crosshair kind of has his boss fight, you could see him take down somebody of note because he's been struggling this season with his aim. He's been struggling with this season. He, you know, had one job in the plan to get Omega, and he missed the shot. You know, he's been struggling in a lot of ways with his abilities this season. So I think maybe having that CX2 propping him up as this formidable villain it's going to give Crosshair somebody to fight in the end. Could it still be a big reveal? Possibly. But I think saving that big reveal to the last episode and then not having any more, like if there was another season, I would say, yeah, I think we'll see who his identity is, and if it's possibly still Tech or possibly somebody else important, sure. But since it's the finale of the show, if we just get like this big reveal that it's Tech, and then they kill him again, or they grab him and take him away, it's like, well, when are we going to see what happens with that? I think it's just one more thing to add on to the plate. So as of now, I'm okay with CX2 just kind of being clone assassin with a lot of power similar to Crosshair, so Crosshair can beat him and kind of reclaim that mantle.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I want to add to that is it is Marok for sure. No, I would say, like you said, make it like a boss fight, especially if Crosshair is separated from the group. If we're gonna reveal it to be Tech, it'd suck because I think Tech has to be with everybody there, and then if you're raising the question that it is Tech, that they want to save him, but he can't be saved, right? I think that'd be too depressing. Like it's already sad enough that he died, but at least he died almost with a choice of his own. I think we should leave it that way. What would be really cool is if the CX2 almost messes up this initial Dark Trooper project and then takes over the exosuit because he's desperate. He's like, I'm so mad. Like I've been like sidelined. Like he literally has been in these few episodes, and he's mad at the Bad Batch. Maybe because he's just like one of these clones that was affected by their decisions in season 1 and whatnot. And then he dons the armor, and we can see like just how terrifying it can be. Again, I think if you're bringing CX2 and focusing on him, it would be cool if it's someone we know, but it'd also be cool if we focus on him and show how like jealousy and like anger and modifications to the brain and all that can really mess up an individual. And then on top of that, add on like this Dark Trooper technology, give more reasons for Palpatine to be like, Hemlock, you're fired / killed. I'll save that for later. That was interesting, right? Like you can use him as like a scapegoat.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if it was Tech, like the identity would have needed to be revealed somewhere in the middle of the season, because then you could have the whole tragedy of whether he dies, succumbs to the brainwashing, helps the Bad Batch again. There's something to that character. As of now, that character has just been there to fight. So if you add some weight to that character now, it would feel a little out of place. It would feel a little bit like, okay, was that necessary? Because if you just kill him, then no matter who it is, if it's somebody of note, whether it's Cody, another clone we've seen that's not in Rebels, Tech, whoever, it's going to feel underwhelming if they just die in the last episode after only being really shown in like 3 episodes total. So I think that would be kind of a mistake. Although, I don't discount that possibly happening. It would be a mistake, but we've seen that before, both in Disney Plus Star Wars shows and a lot in Disney Plus Marvel shows. So there is that possibility. I just have higher hopes with the Bad Batch. It seems in general a little better plotted out, cameos and all. It's better plotted out because it's 3 seasons and it's been the same team the entire time. So I don't think they would do something that kind of cheap with the story. But thank you everybody so much for watching. We're going to have to wrap it up here. We've gone for almost an hour and 45 minutes, but we really appreciate that everybody joined us here for this week and this episode of The Bad Batch. Make sure you come back next week, 7 p.m. Pacific time. We will be talking about episode 14, the penultimate episode of The Bad Batch. So make sure you come back and join us for that. We'll have predictions for that video or for that episode up early next week. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And as always, when we're doing the streams, we'll let you guys send in your questions, your comments, so we can talk about what we think will happen in the finale. Hopefully next week really sets us up for some cool, juicy theories and some great discussion here for how this show might completely wrap up. I can't believe we're 2 episodes away from the Bad Batch being over. But that's what we're going to talk about next week. So make sure you join us. As always on the channel, we've got a lot of stuff going on. Great videos coming out, as well as shorts and community polls. We're voting for our favorite Star Wars characters in a new tournament. So if you're interested in that, check that out. What else do we have going on? I think that's pretty much everything right now. Thanks everybody so much for watching this stream, for joining us and asking your questions. And we will see you all next week.